The sky over Geneva turned dark at noon, not because of clouds. A shadow fell across the whole city, then across all of Europe, then across the entire planet. People ran into the streets and looked up. What they saw made many of them fall silent with fear. A ship hung in the sky. It was not small. It was not something that could be measured in miles. The ship blocked out the sun in sections, like a moving eclipse that never fully passed. Cameras on every continent turned upward. News stations across the world showed the same image at the same time. For the first time in human history, every person on Earth was looking at the same thing, at the same moment, with the same question in their mind. Are we alone? The answer came 6 hours later. A voice spoke in every language at once, through every phone, every radio, every television screen, even through devices that were turned off. Scientists later found that the voice had somehow used the electricity in the air itself to speak, without needing any receiver at all. The voice was deep and slow, and it did not sound angry. It sounded bored, the way a king might sound when speaking to servants he did not respect. People of this world, I am Vorthak Dral, king of the Skarn Dominion. Your world is now within my reach. I have conquered 41 worlds before this one. Some of them fought me. All of them lost. I offer you a choice that I rarely offer. Surrender your world to me now. Hand over your weapons, your factories, your governments, and your leaders, and I will allow your species to live as workers under my rule. Refuse, and I will burn your cities from orbit until you learn to kneel. You have 1 day to answer. Then the voice stopped, and the world was silent. In an underground command center beneath the Rocky Mountains, built decades earlier for reasons nobody expected would ever be real, a group of the most powerful people on Earth gathered around a long table. Generals from a dozen countries sat beside scientists, engineers, and diplomats. At the head of the table sat Amara Osei, the Secretary General of the newly formed World Defense Council, a body that had been created only 3 years earlier, almost as a joke, because nobody believed aliens were real. Nobody was joking now. Talk to me, Amara said. Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking slightly on the table. What do we know? General Elena Cho, commander of Earth's combined space forces, stood up. She was a short woman, with gray hair pulled back tightly, and she had spent 30 years preparing for wars that never came. Now one had arrived, and it was not the kind anyone had trained for. We know the ship is real, Elena said. We know it is enormous, larger than anything we have ever built or imagined building. Our satellites cannot get a full reading of its size, because parts of it are still hidden behind the horizon. We know it did not use any drive system we understand to arrive here. There was no warning, no engine trail, nothing. One moment there was empty sky. The next moment, there was a ship blocking the sun. And our chances? Amara asked. If we fight? Elena did not answer right away. She looked around the room at the faces watching her, waiting for a lie that might comfort them. She decided not to give them one. If we fight with what we have today, we lose. Badly. Our best weapons could not scratch a ship of that size. We have no proof this Vorthak is even lying about the 41 worlds. If it is true, then every single one of those worlds had space fleets, defense systems, and weapons more advanced than ours in some cases, and all of them lost. The room went quiet. Somewhere down the table, a young engineer named Marcus Reyes, who had been invited to the meeting because he had spent the last decade studying strange radio signals from deep space for a private research company, cleared his throat. Can I say something? He asked. Amara nodded at him. I've been listening to the recording of the king's message over and over, Marcus said. Not the words, the way he said them. He didn't sound like someone who was worried about losing. He sounded like someone who was tired of an easy job. That tells me something important. This is routine for him. Conquering worlds is routine. What does that tell us? A general across the table asked, sounding annoyed. It tells us he's never met an enemy who surprised him, Marcus said. 41 worlds surrendered, or fought and lost the normal way. Ships against ships, weapons against weapons. He has a plan for that. He probably has a plan for every kind of war that looks like a war. So what do you suggest? Amara asked. We don't fight? I'm saying we don't fight the way he expects, Marcus said. We don't have the ships, we don't have the weapons, But we have something none of those other 41 worlds might have had. What's that? Elena asked, leaning forward. Marcus looked at her, and for a moment, something like a small, tired smile crossed his face. We have a few 100,000 years of practice at refusing to give up, even when we should have. Every empire on this planet that ever thought it had won completely, forever, eventually lost. Every disease that was supposed to wipe us out, we found a way to survive. Every war that should have ended civilization made us rebuild something stronger. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it's what we are. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then General Elena Cho asked the question that would change the course of the next several days, and possibly the next several centuries. So what do we send back to him? That question ended up being debated for the next 18 hours, in rooms all across the planet, by people who did not normally agree with each other on anything. Presidents called other presidents they had never spoken to. Old rivalries were put aside, not because anyone suddenly trusted each other, but because everyone understood that a world divided against an enemy like this would simply be a world that fell one piece at a time. Some voices argued for surrender. They were not cowards. They were people who looked at the size of that ship and did simple math. A population of 8 billion people had a lot to lose, and losing all of it to prove a point felt, to some, like a foolish trade. Other voices argued for a show of force. Launch every missile Earth had at the ship, all at once, and hope that sheer numbers could do what individual weapons could not. Military experts quickly shot this idea down. If the ship's defenses could handle even a fraction of a percent of that attack, a full assault would only reveal exactly how weak Earth's weapons truly were, and it would remove any element of surprise for later. It was Marcus Reyes, sitting quietly through most of the shouting, who eventually offered the idea that the council settled on. He proposed that instead of a threat, or a surrender, or a plea, humanity should send something the king would not expect at all. A single short transmission, with no words in it whatsoever. No demands, no pleading, no boasting. Just proof. Marcus and a small team of historians, archivists, and data engineers worked through the night. They pulled together a short compressed file, only a few minutes long if played as a video, though it was not exactly a video. It was closer to a compressed record, something that could be understood by nearly any species with eyes and a memory, regardless of language. It showed images, cities destroyed by war, rebuilt taller than before. Entire nations nearly wiped out by disease, coming back within a single generation stronger than they had been. Small groups of poorly equipped fighters, defeating armies many times their size, using nothing but knowledge of the land and refusal to stop moving forward. It showed humanity's darkest moments, one after another, without excuse or apology. And after each terrible image, it showed what came after. Not peace, not surrender, but rebuilding, growth, more people, more cities, more strength than existed before the disaster. At the very end of the file, after all of the images, there was a single simple message written in the mathematical language that scientists across Earth had once designed for exactly this kind of moment, a language built from numbers and shapes rather than words, meant to be understood by any species capable of basic logic. The message translated, roughly, into a phrase that every person on the council agreed was both true and terrifying in its simplicity. We have survived worse than you. Come and see. There was fierce debate right up until the final hour about whether to send it. Some worried it was too aggressive, that it would provoke immediate destruction rather than caution. Others worried it was not aggressive enough, that a king who had conquered 41 worlds would simply laugh at a slideshow of human history and destroy the planet anyway out of spite. In the end, Amara Osei made the final call, standing alone in a small room with the transmission ready to send, her finger hovering over a single button that would decide the next chapter of human history. We are not the strongest species he has ever met, she said quietly to the small group with her. We both know that, but maybe we can be the strangest one. Maybe that buys us something. Time, doubt, hesitation. Anything is better than silence. She pressed the button. The message went out at exactly midnight, Geneva time, 23 hours and 40 minutes after the king's ultimatum had been given. It traveled upward, through the atmosphere, into the vast, dark shadow of the alien ship, and disappeared into systems no human had ever seen or touched. For the next 20 minutes, nothing happened. No response came. No new voice spoke through the world's electronics. The giant ship did not move, did not fire, did not do anything at all. It simply hung there, silent, as it had been all day. Down in the underground command center, Elena Cho stood watching a display that showed the ship's position, waiting for any sign of change. Marcus stood beside her, arms crossed, staring at the same screen. "You think he's watching it?" Elena asked quietly. "I think," Marcus said slowly, "that somewhere up there, an alien king who has never lost a war in his life is looking at pictures of humans refusing to die, and for the first time in a very long time, he doesn't know what to do next." Neither of them knew, in that moment, just how right that guess would turn out to be. Far above the clouds, inside a chamber built from black metal and cold light, King Vorthak Drall sat motionless in front of the small floating screen that displayed the strange transmission from the little blue world below him. His advisors stood around him in silence, waiting for him to speak, waiting for him to laugh, waiting for him to give the order to burn the surface and be done with this insignificant rock. He did none of those things. He watched the images again, and a third time. Then, for the first time in over 300 years of conquest, King Vorthak Drall felt something he had almost forgotten the shape of. He felt doubt. King Vorthak Drall had ruled the Skarn Dominion for over 300 years. In that time, he had conquered 41 worlds. He had seen species that could breathe fire, species that lived underwater, species with 6 arms, and species with none at all, only long tendrils that moved like snakes. He had seen empires built on stone, and empires built on light. He had beaten every one of them. He had never seen anything like the message the humans sent him. He sat in his private chamber long after his advisors had been dismissed, watching the images again on the small floating screen. Burned cities rebuilt taller than before. Diseases that should have ended a species, instead making that species stronger within a single generation. Small groups of poorly armed fighters, standing against armies many times their size, and winning through nothing but refusal to stop. And that final message. Simple. Clear. Almost insulting in how calm it was. "We have survived worse than you. Come and see." Vorthak called his chief strategist back into the room. Her name was Zeth, and she had served him for over 100 years, longer than any other advisor in his court. She was tall and thin, with pale gray skin and eyes that missed nothing. "You have studied it as well?" Vorthak asked. "I have watched it 11 times, my king," Zeth said. "And your judgment?" Zeth hesitated, which was rare for her. She was not a creature who hesitated often. "My judgment is that this is either the cleverest piece of theater any species has ever created to frighten us away, or it is the simple truth, stated plainly, because they had nothing else to offer us. I do not know which." "What do the other advisors say?" "General Korath believes it is a bluff, and wishes to attack immediately, before the humans have time to prepare further. He says every day we wait, they grow stronger, and every day we wait is a day where they might build a weapon capable of surprising us. And you disagree?" "I do not disagree that waiting has a cost," Zeth said carefully, "but I disagree that attacking blindly is wise. My king, in 300 years, we have never once faced an enemy who sent us a message like this instead of a fleet, or a plea, or a surrender flag. Every other world either fought or bowed. This one did neither. That should concern us more than it excites General Korath." Vorthak was quiet for a long moment, turning the small data screen over in his long fingers. "Tell me about the 41 worlds, Zeth. Truly tell me. Not the story we tell in the throne hall. The truth." Zeth's eyes narrowed slightly, surprised by the question, but she answered honestly, as she always did. "Of the 41 worlds we conquered, 38 surrendered before we fired a single shot, once they understood the size of our fleet and the strength of our weapons. 3 worlds fought us. 2 of those 3 fell within a single day of real combat. The third," she paused, "the third took nearly 2 months, and cost us more warriors than all the other conquests combined." "The Ravasi," Vorthak said quietly. "Yes, my king, the Ravasi." The Ravasi had been a small, technologically weaker species, living on a rocky world with thin air and constant storms. On paper, They should have surrendered within hours, like most of the others. Instead, they had fought with everything they had, using tunnels, ambushes, and weapons, built from whatever materials they could scavenge. They had known from the beginning that they could not win a straight battle, so they had refused to fight one. It had taken the Dominion fleet 2 months and thousands of lost soldiers to finally subdue them, and even after their surrender, small pockets of resistance had continued fighting in the mountains for years afterward. Vorthak had never forgotten the Ravasi. They were the only species that had ever made him doubt, even briefly, that his empire was truly unbeatable. "You believe these humans may be like the Ravasi," Vorthak said. It was not a question. "I believe it is possible, my king. And I believe the message they sent was not an accident. They did not send us their strongest weapon, or a threat of destruction, or even a plea for mercy. They sent us proof of their nature. That is not the message of a frightened species trying to save itself through fear. That is the message of a species that wants us to understand exactly what we are dealing with before we choose to attack. Why would they want that? Fear should make an enemy surrender, not fight harder. Unless," Zeth said slowly, "their goal was never to make us afraid enough to leave. Perhaps their goal was to make us afraid enough to be careful. A careful enemy makes mistakes born from hesitation. A careless enemy makes mistakes born from arrogance. Perhaps they understood that we would attack regardless of their message, and they simply wanted to plant a seed of doubt in our minds before that attack began." Vorthak stood and walked to the wide window of his chamber, looking down at the blue and white world below him. From this height, it looked peaceful, small, insignificant, and yet something about the calm certainty of that message gnawed at him in a way no war fleet ever had. "General Korath wishes to attack with the full fleet immediately," Vorthak said. "He does, my king. What would you do instead?" Zeth considered the question carefully before answering. "I would send a smaller force first. Not the full fleet, a single scouting group, backed by enough warriors to take a city if resistance is weak, but small enough that if this species truly does have some hidden strength, we do not risk our entire war effort discovering it. Let them show us what they truly are, before we commit everything we have." Vorthak nodded slowly. It was a cautious plan, more cautious than he usually preferred, but for the first time in 300 years, caution felt like wisdom rather than weakness. "Prepare a scouting force," he said. "Land it near their largest gathering of leaders, the city they call Geneva. Show enough strength to make them afraid, but do not destroy the city outright. I want to see how they respond when danger is close enough to touch, not just a shadow in their sky." "It will be done, my king." Down on Earth, the 20 minutes of silence after the transmission had stretched into hours, and the hours had stretched into a full day. No response came from the ship, no new threats, no destruction. The giant vessel simply hung in the sky, unmoving, as if the entire planet had been forgotten. This silence was, in its own way, more frightening than the original threat had been. In the underground command center, exhausted leaders from every corner of the world tried to use the unexpected pause wisely. Marcus Reyes, running on almost no sleep, worked with a team of scientists and engineers, trying to learn anything they could about the ship above them, using every instrument Earth possessed. General Elena Cho pushed every military force on the planet into a state of readiness that had never existed before, not even during humanity's worst wars. For the first time in history, nations that had spent decades distrusting each other shared satellite data, weapons designs, and defense plans without hesitation, because the alternative, facing this threat divided, was unthinkable to everyone at the table. "We bought time," Amara Osei said, during one of the endless meetings. "But I don't think we bought peace. He's still up there. He's still watching us. We need to use whatever time we have." "Use it for what?" one of the generals asked. "We can't build a fleet capable of matching that ship in a matter of days." "No," Marcus said, standing at the edge of the room where he had been quietly listening. "But maybe we don't need to match the ship. Maybe we need to make sure that whatever comes next, we're not fighting the fight he expects." He walked to the large map of Earth displayed on the wall and pointed to several key locations. "If they send warriors down instead of just weapons from orbit, that changes everything. Orbital weapons are impossible for us to fight directly. But warriors on the ground, in cities, in forests, in mountains, that's a different kind of war. That's a war we have thousands of years of painful experience fighting, on both sides of history. Elena Cho stepped forward, studying the map with new interest. You think they'll send troops? I think a king who has conquered 41 worlds the easy way just received a message telling him this world might not be easy, Marcus said. I think before he risks his whole fleet, he tests us. Small force. Enough to scare us, not enough to lose if things go wrong. That's what I would do, if I were him. Elena nodded slowly, already calculating. Then we prepare defenses for that. Not just missiles pointed at the sky. Ground forces, urban defense, places where numbers and technology matter less than terrain and determination. For the next several hours, Earth's combined militaries began quietly repositioning, not in a way visible from orbit as a grand show of force, but in small, careful movements meant to blend into the ordinary chaos of a planet on edge. Soldiers moved into cities disguised as civilians. Weapons were hidden in basements, tunnels, and old subway systems built decades earlier, for reasons nobody had truly expected to need. Communication networks were rebuilt to work even if satellites were destroyed, using old methods long forgotten by most of the world. Wires and radio towers, and human runners, carrying messages on foot if necessary. Above the clouds, King Vorthak's scouting force prepared for launch. 10 small landing craft, carrying 200 Skarn warriors each, along with heavier weapons meant to demonstrate strength, without wasting the full might of the Dominion fleet. It was, by Vorthak's own standards, a gentle opening move. He did not yet understand that gentle would not be enough, not against a species that had learned, over hundreds of thousands of years, exactly how to survive being tested. As the landing craft broke away from the massive ship and began their descent toward Geneva, King Vorthak watched from his chamber, Zeth standing silently beside him. Do you still believe they are like the Ravasi? He asked her quietly. Zeth watched the small craft grow smaller as they fell toward the blue and white world below. I believe, my king, that we are about to find out. The 10 landing craft came down through the clouds over Switzerland just before dawn. They did not land quietly. Each ship was the size of a large building, and the sound of their engines rolled across the hills like thunder that never stopped. People in nearby towns woke to windows shaking, and car alarms screaming across empty streets. General Elena Cho watched the descent from the command center, her eyes fixed on the tracking display. 10 craft, she said. Just like Marcus predicted. Confirmed troop estimates. Sensors suggest roughly 2,000 hostiles total, an officer reported. Heavy armor. Advanced weapons. They're landing in a ring around the city, not inside it. They want to surround it first, Elena said. Cut off escape before they push in. Classic siege tactic, just with better technology. Orders, General? Elena did not hesitate. Let them land. Let them think they're in control. Do not engage until they move into the streets. We fight this on our terms, not theirs. The Skarn warriors marched out of their landing craft in tight formation, their armor gleaming faintly gray and black in the early morning light. They were tall, broad-shouldered creatures, taller than the average human by nearly 2 feet, with thick skin that could turn aside small arms fire, and eyes that could see clearly in near darkness. They carried weapons that fired bolts of energy, capable of punching through solid concrete walls. They expected the humans to run. On 38 worlds before this one, the sight of Skarn warriors landing had been enough to end resistance before it began. Populations had fled or surrendered, overwhelmed by fear and the simple, brutal math of the situation. The streets of Geneva were empty. The Skarn commander leading the ground force, a hardened veteran named Draxus, found this unsettling rather than reassuring. Empty streets on 38 other worlds had meant surrender. Empty streets here felt different. Wrong somehow, though he could not say exactly why. Spread into the city, he ordered through his communicator. Secure the central buildings. Report any resistance immediately. His warriors moved forward in disciplined lines, weapons ready, boots echoing on empty stone streets. They passed abandoned cafes, shuttered shops, cars left parked at odd angles, as if their owners had simply stepped out and never returned. The silence stretched on, broken only by the wind and the distant sound of a flag snapping against its pole somewhere above them. Then the first explosion tore through the middle of their formation. It came from beneath the street, a charge planted in the old sewer tunnels weeks before the king's ship had even arrived, part of contingency plans built decades earlier by paranoid governments who had never truly believed they would need them. 3 Skarn warriors fell instantly. The rest scattered, taking cover, weapons raised, searching for an enemy they could not see. That was when the humans attacked. They came from windows above, from doorways, from manholes in the street, from behind parked cars. They were not soldiers in matching uniforms marching in straight lines. They were small teams, moving fast, firing quick bursts from cover, before disappearing again into the maze of the old city. Some carried modern rifles, modified with armor-piercing rounds, designed specifically after studying the footage from the king's initial ultimatum broadcast, when cameras across the world had briefly captured glimpses of Skarn armor plating. Others carried improvised weapons, explosives built in the last few days, from whatever materials had been available. Draxus had faced ambushes before, on other worlds, but never one this coordinated, this patient, this willing to trade blood for confusion. His warriors, trained for open battle against organized armies, found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to stand still long enough to be properly targeted. "Fall back to the central square," Draxus ordered. "Regroup, form a defensive position, call for." The order was cut short as a missile, fired from a rooftop nearly a mile away, struck the lead landing craft still sitting in its position outside the city. The explosion lit up the morning sky, and the shockwave rattled windows across half of Geneva. In the command center, Elena Cho watched the chaos unfold on her screens with grim satisfaction, though she allowed herself no celebration. 2,000 well-armed alien warriors against a hidden defense force of roughly 600 trained soldiers and volunteers was still a desperate fight, and she knew it. "Casualty report," she said quietly. "We're taking losses, General. Team Bravo reports 6 dead, 11 wounded, but the enemy formation is broken. They can't regroup, not while we keep hitting their flanks." "Keep hitting," Elena said. "Don't let them breathe. Don't let them think." For nearly 3 hours, the battle raged through the narrow streets of old Geneva, a city built centuries before anyone imagined it would need to survive an alien invasion, its winding alleys and ancient stone buildings turning into the greatest weapon Earth had that day. The Skarn warriors, trained for wide-open battlefields and direct confrontation, struggled against an enemy that used every twist and turn of the city to its advantage, striking and vanishing, wearing down their strength piece by piece. By mid-morning, Commander Draxus had lost nearly a third of his force, and the remainder were pinned down near the central square, unable to advance or retreat safely. He sent an emergency signal back to the fleet above, requesting immediate extraction and reinforcement. King Vorthak received the report in his chamber, standing beside Zeth, his expression unreadable, as the casualty numbers scrolled across the screen before him. "Explain this to me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. 2,000 of my warriors, against what our scans suggested was a lightly defended civilian city. How is it possible that we are losing? Zeth studied the incoming battle reports carefully before answering. "They did not fight us as an army, my king. They fought us as ghosts. Small groups, hidden, striking only when the advantage was clearly theirs, then disappearing before we could respond. Our warriors were trained to fight enemies who stand and face them. This enemy refuses to stand anywhere long enough to be found." "The message," Vorthak said quietly, almost to himself. "The images, small groups defeating larger armies through refusal to fight fairly." "Yes, my king. It appears that was not merely history. It appears to be their nature." General Korath, who had argued for the full fleet attack from the very beginning, stormed into the chamber, his face twisted with anger and wounded pride. "My king, give the order. Let me take the full fleet down. We will burn every hiding place they have. Let them try their tricks against orbital bombardment." Vorthak raised a hand for silence, and Korath, though clearly furious, obeyed. The king turned back to the window, looking down at the small blue world where, for the first time in 300 years, his warriors were losing a battle they should have won easily. "If we bombard from orbit," Vorthak said slowly, "we destroy the very world we came to conquer. A ruined planet is worth nothing to the Dominion. We did not come here to leave ash behind us. We came here for a new world to add to the Empire, its resources, its labor, its value. Burning it to prove a point serves no purpose except my own wounded pride. Then what do you suggest, my king? Korath demanded, his patience clearly worn thin. Vorthak was silent for a long moment before he spoke again. Order the ground force to withdraw. Recall Commander Draxus and whatever remains of his warriors. Korath's mouth fell open in shock. Withdraw? My king, we have never withdrawn from any battle in 300 years. If word of this reaches the other worlds under our rule, then it will remind them that even the Dominion respects a worthy enemy, Vorthak said sharply, cutting him off. We will not throw away more of our warriors in a city built specifically to make us bleed for every step we take. We will study what happened here. We will learn from it. And then, when we return, it will not be with 2,000 warriors testing the waters. It will be with everything we have, and we will not repeat the same mistakes twice. Down in Geneva, as the surviving Skarn warriors began their retreat toward the remaining landing craft, word spread quickly among the human defenders that the enemy was pulling back. It was not a clean victory. Nearly 90 human soldiers and volunteers had died in the fighting, along with countless buildings damaged or destroyed, and the emotional weight of the battle sat heavily over the entire command center, even as the news of the retreat came in. But it was, undeniably, a retreat. The first one in 300 years of the Skarn Dominion's history, and Earth had caused it. They're pulling back, an officer reported, disbelief evident in his voice. The ground force is retreating to their landing craft. They're leaving. Elena Cho allowed herself a single slow breath, the first real breath she had taken in what felt like hours. She did not smile. She knew, better than anyone in that room, exactly what this retreat likely meant. They're not giving up, she said quietly. They're regrouping. This was a test, and we passed it in the worst possible way for us. We showed them exactly how dangerous we can be, which means next time, they won't send 2,000 warriors to test the waters. What will they send? Amara Ose asked, standing beside her, her face pale but steady. Elena turned to look at the massive shadow still hanging in the sky above them, unmoved despite the chaos below. Everything, she said. Next time, they'll send everything. Far above the clouds, King Vorthak Dral watched the last of his landing craft rise back into the safety of his fleet, carrying home a battered force that had learned, in a single morning, more about fear than they had in 300 years of easy conquest. He turned to Zeth, his expression grim but resolved. Prepare the full fleet, he said. We return to this world in 7 days, and this time, we do not test them. We finish them. 7 days was not long. For Earth, it felt like both an eternity, and no time at all. In the underground command center, nobody slept more than a few hours at a time. Every nation on the planet had thrown open its weapons stockpiles, its factories, its research labs, and its people, working toward a single shared goal that no war in human history had ever managed to produce before: complete cooperation. Old borders still existed on paper, but in practice, soldiers from countries that had once been bitter enemies now stood shoulder to shoulder, sharing weapons, plans, and food, because the alternative was facing King Vorthak's full fleet divided and alone. Marcus Reyes barely left the science wing of the command center during those 7 days. He and his team pored over every scrap of data collected from the battle in Geneva, studying the wreckage of the destroyed landing craft, examining fragments of Skarn armor and weapons, looking for any weakness that could be exploited. Their armor is strong against direct impact, Marcus explained, during one of the endless briefings, standing beside a table covered with pieces of gray, metallic Skarn plating. But it's not perfect. It's designed to stop energy weapons and standard kinetic rounds. It wasn't designed to survive being hit by something built from scavenged human technology, because they've never faced that kind of technology before. Our improvised explosives did more damage than our actual military-grade weapons in some cases, simply because their armor wasn't calibrated to expect it. So we build more improvised weapons, a general said. We do more than that, Marcus said. We study everything about how they fight, their formations, their communication patterns, their reaction times. Every piece of data we gathered from that battle is a piece of the puzzle we didn't have before, and I don't think we're the only ones learning. General Elena Cho, standing at the head of the table, nodded grimly. Vorthak will have studied this battle as closely as we have. He'll come back smarter, We have to assume his full fleet won't repeat the same mistakes his scouting force made. Then we can't repeat our own strategy exactly either, Marcus said. Whatever we do next has to be something they haven't seen yet. Over the following days, humanity's defense plan took shape, built from pieces contributed by scientists, soldiers, and ordinary citizens across the globe. Weapons manufacturers who had spent decades building missiles and jets for conflicts between nations now turned their factories toward a single unified purpose. Civilian engineers who understood satellite systems better than most military officers helped design a network of small, cheap, disposable drones meant to overwhelm alien sensors through sheer numbers rather than individual strength. Retired soldiers who remembered old tactics from long-forgotten wars, tactics built around patience and terrain rather than raw firepower, were brought in to train new volunteers in the art of fighting an enemy that could not be beaten through strength alone. But the single greatest advantage humanity had was something that could not be built in a factory or trained into a soldier in 7 days. It was unity, and it was resolve, and Elena Cho understood exactly how valuable that was, even if it could not be measured on any sensor readout. "We are not going to win this by matching their strength," she said during the final briefing before the fleet's expected return. "We are going to win this, if we win it at all, by making sure that every single day of this fight costs them more than they expected to pay, until the cost is simply too high for a king like Vorthak to justify continuing." On the 7th day, exactly as promised, the sky darkened again, but this time, it was not one ship blocking the sun. It was hundreds. King Vorthak's full fleet emerged from the shadow of the moon, spreading out across the sky, in a formation that stretched from horizon to horizon, an armada larger than anything human eyes had ever witnessed, built from the resources of 41 conquered worlds and 300 years of unbroken victory. In his flagship, King Vorthak stood at the head of his war council, watching the small blue planet grow larger on the view screen before him. Beside him, Zeth studied tactical reports with careful, focused eyes. "This time," Vorthak said, "we do not send a small force to test their strength. We send everything, all at once, overwhelming every corner of their defenses before they have time to organize the kind of resistance we saw in Geneva." "A wise approach, my king," Zeth said, "though I would caution against underestimating them a second time. They have had 7 days to prepare, and their message, and their actions in Geneva, both suggest a species that uses every scrap of time available to them." "I am not underestimating them, Zeth," Vorthak said. "I am ending this before their preparation matters. Order the fleet to begin the assault." The invasion began not with troops on the ground, but with a wave of smaller attack craft descending through the atmosphere, targeting military installations, communication centers, and defense systems across every continent simultaneously. It was a coordinated strike meant to blind and cripple Earth's defenses before any ground battle even began, and for the first several hours, it seemed to be working exactly as Vorthak intended. But Earth had learned from Geneva as well. Rather than relying on a small number of large, powerful defense systems, which made easy and obvious targets from orbit, humanity had spent the past 7 days spreading its defenses thin across thousands of smaller, cheaper installations, many of them hidden in plain sight inside ordinary buildings, disguised as civilian infrastructure. For every command center the Skarn attack craft destroyed, 3 more, hidden and unknown, remained active and ready. "They're hitting hard," an officer reported in the underground command center, "but they're wasting resources on targets that don't matter as much as they think. We moved our real command network into the old subway systems 3 days ago. What they're destroying up top is mostly decoys." Elena Cho allowed herself a small, tight smile. "Good. Let them think they're winning. Begin Phase 2. Phase 2 was the deployment of thousands of small, cheap drones, built quickly and in massive numbers over the past 7 days, designed with a single purpose: to overwhelm the sensors and defenses of the much larger, more advanced Skarn attack craft through sheer numbers rather than individual strength. Where a single human fighter jet might have been easily destroyed by superior alien weapons, a swarm of 500 small drones, each carrying a modest explosive charge, proved far more difficult to fully stop, especially when they attacked in coordinated waves from multiple directions at once. Across the skies of Earth, the battle turned into chaos. Massive alien attack craft, designed to dominate conventional military forces, found themselves swarmed by clouds of small, fast, difficult-to-target drones. Losses mounted on both sides, but for every human drone destroyed, the cost to build another was measured in mere hours of factory time, while every Skarn craft lost represented resources and warriors that could not be so easily replaced. Meanwhile, on the ground, Skarn landing forces began touching down across major cities worldwide, far larger in number than the scouting force sent to Geneva 7 days earlier. This time, King Vorthak had committed the majority of his ground troops to the assault, unwilling to repeat the mistake of underestimating human resistance. The fighting that followed was brutal, and it stretched across every continent at once. In some cities, human forces used the same guerrilla tactics that had proven so effective in Geneva, striking from hidden positions and retreating before the enemy could properly respond. In others, where Skarn forces had learned from their previous defeat and adjusted their formations to be more spread out and cautious, the fighting became a grinding, costly struggle for every street and building. Marcus Reyes worked from a mobile command unit near the front lines in what remained of Geneva, coordinating with scientists and engineers across the world as new problems emerged in real time. When Skarn forces began using heavier armor resistant to the improvised explosives that had worked so well before, Marcus and his team rushed new weapon designs into production within hours, using data gathered from the battlefield itself. "They're adapting faster than I expected," Marcus admitted during a brief moment of rest, speaking to Elena Cho over a secure channel. "But so are we. This is turning into exactly the kind of fight I hoped it would be. Not a war of pure strength, a war of who can learn faster and bend without breaking." "And who's winning that war?" Elena asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment, before answering honestly. "I don't know yet. It's close. Too close." The battle raged for 3 full days without pause, the longest continuous military engagement in human history, fought simultaneously on every continent, against an enemy fleet larger and more powerful than anything Earth had ever imagined facing. Casualties mounted on both sides. Cities that had stood for centuries were damaged or destroyed. Millions of people around the world sheltered in whatever safety they could find, watching the skies above them fill with fire and wreckage, uncertain whether their species would survive to see a 4th day. On the 3rd night, deep within his flagship, King Vorthak stood alone before the view screen, watching the reports come in from across the battlefield. The numbers troubled him deeply, though he showed no outward sign of it to his advisors. His fleet had lost nearly a third of its ground forces and a significant portion of its smaller attack craft. 38 worlds had surrendered before costing him this much. 2 of the 3 that had fought had fallen within a single day. Only the Ravasi had ever cost him this dearly, and even they had not managed to inflict this level of sustained damage across so many battlefields at once. Szeth entered quietly, her expression grave. "My king, the losses continue to mount. Some of the War Council are beginning to question whether continuing this assault is wise." "And what do you believe, Szeth?" Vorthak asked without turning from the screen. "I believe," Szeth said carefully, "that we underestimated them not once but twice now. I believe that if we continue this path without changing our approach, we may win eventually, through sheer weight of numbers and resources, but the cost will be higher than any conquest in the history of the Dominion. I believe, my king, that it may be time to ask ourselves not whether we can win, but whether winning this way is worth what it will cost us." Vorthak was silent for a long time, watching the small blue and white world below him, a world that refused, again and again, to simply lie down and accept defeat, the way 38 others had. "Prepare a full assault on their capital," he said finally, "not the scattered strikes we have been using. Everything, focused on a single point, tomorrow. If they truly wish to test the full might of the Dominion, let us show them exactly what that means, once and for all." Szeth bowed her head and left to relay the order, though something in her expression suggested she was not entirely certain this final push would end the way her king hoped it would. Down below, in the ruins of what remained of the underground command center, Elena Cho and Marcus Reyes stood together, exhausted, reviewing the reports of 3 days of relentless fighting. The cost had been enormous. But so had the cost to the enemy, and for the first time since the giant ship had first appeared in the sky, both of them allowed themselves to believe, just slightly, that survival was still possible. "They're going to come again tomorrow," Elena said quietly. harder than before. All of it, aimed right at us. Marcus nodded slowly, looking at the map of the battle spread across the table before him, marked with 3 days of losses and small, hard-won victories. Then we'd better make sure, he said, that when they come, we're ready to give them the fight of their very long lives. On the 4th day, King Vorthak Drall committed the full weight of his remaining fleet to a single, focused assault on Geneva, the city that had first humbled his warriors, and had since become, in his mind, the symbol of everything stubborn and strange about this small blue world. He no longer cared about efficient conquest or preserving resources. He cared only about ending this, about proving, once and for all, that 300 years of unbroken victory had not been a lie. From the underground command center, now battered and scarred from 3 days of relentless attack but still standing, Elena Cho watched the fleet formations shifting on her display, all of them converging toward a single point on the map. "They're coming for us directly," she said, "all of it. Everything they have left." "That's what we hoped for," Marcus Reyes said, standing beside her, his eyes fixed on the same screen. "A king who commits everything to one final push is a king who has stopped thinking carefully and started thinking with anger. And if we're wrong about that?" Marcus did not have an easy answer for that question, and he did not pretend to. "Then we find out very quickly." Over the previous 3 days, while the visible battle raged across the surface of the planet, a second, quieter effort had been underway, one that only a small handful of people even knew existed. Deep beneath the Nevada desert, in a facility built decades earlier, during a time when governments quietly worried about threats from beyond the planet, without ever truly expecting to face one, scientists and engineers had been working around the clock on a single, desperate project, adapting a piece of orbital debris-clearing technology, originally designed to gently redirect dangerous asteroids away from Earth, into something far more aggressive. It was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It could not fire beams of destructive energy, or launch explosive warheads capable of piercing alien armor. What it could do, if it worked exactly as designed, was generate a powerful, focused gravitational pulse, capable of disrupting the delicate balance that kept a massive object like King Vorthak's flagship stable in low orbit. It had never been tested on anything remotely as large as the Skarn flagship. Nobody could say for certain it would work at all. But as the King's fleet gathered above Geneva for the final assault, it was the only card humanity had left to play, beyond raw courage and stubborn refusal to surrender. "The device is ready," a young engineer reported over a secure channel to the command center, her voice tight with exhaustion and fear. "But we need him directly overhead, low enough in the atmosphere for the pulse to have full effect. If he stays in high orbit, this won't work." "He'll come low," Elena said with grim certainty. "He wants to watch this battle himself, up close. Pride will bring him within range. We just need to survive long enough to get him there." The final battle for Geneva began at dawn, on the 4th day, and it was unlike anything that had come before it. King Vorthak's remaining warriors, numbering still in the tens of thousands despite 3 days of losses, descended upon the city in overwhelming force, supported by attack craft that filled the sky from horizon to horizon. Every human soldier, volunteer, and defender, still capable of fighting, took up positions across the ruined streets, prepared to hold the line for as long as it took. The fighting was fierce and desperate. Humanity's earlier advantages, the element of surprise, the unfamiliar tactics that had confused and frustrated Skarn forces in the opening days of the war, had largely faded, as Vorthak's warriors had adapted, learning to fight more cautiously, more spread out, more resistant to the kind of ambushes that had cost them so dearly before. What remained for the defenders was simple: brutal determination, the same stubborn refusal to break that had defined humanity's long, difficult history. High above the battlefield, King Vorthak's flagship began its slow descent, the king himself unwilling to remain distant, while his warriors fought what he intended to be the final battle of this campaign. He wanted to see the moment this world finally broke, to witness it with his own eyes, after 300 years of conquest. "My king," Zeth said cautiously, standing beside him as the massive ship lowered itself into the upper atmosphere. "Is this wise? Remaining at a safe distance would allow us equal command over the battle, without unnecessary risk." "I have watched every conquest of my reign from a safe distance," Zeth, Vorthak said, his eyes fixed on the chaos, unfolding on the view screen below. This world has cost me more than any other. I will watch this one end up close. Down in the ruins of the command center, Elena Cho watched the tracking display with held breath as the massive flagship continued its descent, lower and lower, finally settling into the range the Nevada facility's engineers had calculated as necessary for their desperate gambit to work. "He's in range," she said quietly. "Do it, now." In the Nevada desert, deep underground, the young engineer and her team activated the device, pouring every remaining bit of power available to them into a single, focused pulse, aimed directly at the coordinates of King Vorthak's flagship. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly at first, and then with terrifying speed, the massive ship began to shudder. Alarms blared through every corridor of the flagship as its systems struggled to compensate for a sudden, inexplicable loss of stability. King Vorthak, thrown from his feet by the violent shaking, stared in disbelief at the chaos erupting around him. "What is happening?" he demanded, pulling himself upright as Zeth struggled to reach a stable console. "Unknown, my king," Zeth called back, fighting to be heard over the alarms. "Something is disrupting our stabilization systems. We are losing altitude rapidly." The flagship, the largest and most powerful vessel in the Skarn Dominion's entire fleet, began to fall. It did not crash, not entirely. The ship's emergency systems, though badly damaged, managed to slow the descent enough to prevent complete destruction, bringing the massive vessel down hard on the outskirts of the ruined city, rather than smashing it into a fiery wreck. But the damage was severe, and for the first time in 300 years, King Vorthak Dral found himself grounded on the surface of a world he had come to conquer, his flagship crippled, his warriors scattered and confused by the sudden chaos above them. Word of the flagship's fall spread through both sides almost instantly. Skarn warriors, already exhausted from days of brutal fighting and unaccustomed to any kind of setback after 300 years of easy victories, began to falter, their morale shaken by the sight of their king's own vessel brought down. Human defenders, seeing the massive ship crash on the horizon, found new strength in the unexpected sign that their enemy was not, after all, invincible. Elena Cho did not hesitate. "All forces, converge on the crash site. If Vorthak is still alive in there, I want him found before his warriors can regroup and protect him." The fighting that followed was fierce, but brief, as human forces pushed hard toward the downed flagship, using the confusion and shaken morale of the Skarn warriors to their advantage. Within hours, a small group of soldiers, led personally by Elena Cho, reached the wreckage of the massive ship, finding it heavily damaged but largely intact, its king still alive within, protected by a small remaining guard of loyal warriors, including Zeth, who had refused to leave his side. What followed was not a final desperate battle to the death, though it easily could have been. Instead, as human soldiers surrounded the wreckage, weapons ready, King Vorthak Dral did something none of his advisors, and certainly none of the humans watching, expected. He ordered his remaining warriors to lower their weapons. Elena Cho approached the wreckage cautiously, flanked by soldiers on every side, until she stood face to face with the alien king who had, only 4 days earlier, demanded the surrender of her entire species. Up close, he was even larger than she had imagined from the footage, his gray skin marked with the scars of old battles across 100 different worlds, his eyes sharp and calculating despite the exhaustion clearly written across his face. "You are their leader," Vorthak said, his voice carrying clearly, despite the damage to the ship around them. "One of them," Elena said carefully. "We don't have just one." Something like understanding, or perhaps grim amusement, crossed Vorthak's face. "Of course you don't. That would be far too simple for a species like yours." "You demanded our surrender," Elena said. "We sent you a message instead." Was it clear enough? Vorthak was quiet for a long moment, studying her carefully, and behind her, the ruined city, the exhausted soldiers, the small drones still buzzing overhead, evidence everywhere of a species that had fought for 4 days against overwhelming odds, and had, somehow, not broken. "Clearer than I would have liked," he said finally. "In 300 years, no world has ever cost me what yours has cost me in 4 days. 38 worlds surrendered without a fight, 3 fought, and I won each of those within weeks at most. Your world has fought me for 4 days, and has not surrendered, has not broken, and has, against every calculation my strategists made, brought down my own flagship using technology I did not even know you possessed. We didn't either, until we needed it, Elena said honestly. Vorthak let out something that might have been a laugh, low and rough, though there was little humor in it. The message you sent me, the images, the words. We have survived worse than you. Come and see. I believed it was theater, a clever trick meant to buy time or provoke hesitation. I understand now that it was simply the truth, stated as plainly as your species knew how to state it. So what happens now? Elena asked, her hand resting near her weapon, though she made no move to raise it. You still have warriors. We still have a planet full of people who are tired of dying to prove a point. Vorthak considered the question carefully, looking past her at the ruined city, at the scattered wreckage of his own fleet visible in the smoke-filled sky, and at the small group of exhausted, determined humans surrounding him, weapons ready, but not yet fired. In 300 years, he said slowly, I have never once withdrawn from a conquest I began. I withdrew from Geneva 7 days ago, and I told myself it was strategy, patience, wisdom. I told myself I would return and finish what I started, and I did return, and your world has cost me more than I am willing to pay to finish it. He straightened, despite his injuries, standing as tall as his damaged body allowed, and for a moment, something in his bearing shifted from a conquered king to something closer to a king making a genuine choice. I offer you this instead, he said. Not conquest, not surrender. A withdrawal, and a warning carried back to my empire, that this world is not worth the cost of taking it, not through force. If your species ever wishes to deal with the Dominion on other terms, terms of trade or alliance, or simple mutual distance, that door remains open, but conquest, I believe, is finished, at least for as long as I sit upon my throne. Elena Cho studied him carefully, searching his weathered, alien face for any sign of deception, and finding, as best she could tell, only the exhausted honesty of a leader who had genuinely miscalculated and was choosing, now, to cut his losses rather than continue paying a price with no end in sight. We'll hold you to that, she said finally. I imagine you will, Vorthak said, and something almost like respect flickered behind his tired eyes. Your species has a talent for holding on to things, General. Grudges, cities, hope. I do not think I will forget that lesson soon. 3 days later, what remained of King Vorthak Dral's fleet withdrew from Earth's orbit, carrying its wounded king and the shattered remains of an army that had, for the first time in 300 years, failed to bring an entire world to its knees. The giant shadow that had once blocked out the sun over Geneva grew smaller and smaller, until finally, it disappeared entirely, leaving behind only the stars and a planet forever changed by what it had survived. Across the world, people who had spent 4 days hiding in shelters and basements slowly emerged into the light, uncertain at first whether the danger was truly gone, then slowly, cautiously, beginning to believe it. Cities that had been damaged began the long process of rebuilding, just as they always had, throughout every hard chapter of human history. In the underground command center, now quiet for the first time in days, Marcus Reyes stood beside Elena Cho and Amara Osei, looking at a screen that showed the last traces of the Skarn fleet disappearing into deep space. Do you think he'll come back? Marcus asked. Maybe, Elena admitted. Maybe not him. Maybe someone else, someday. The stars are big, and we've just proven we're worth noticing. Amara looked out over the ruined but standing city beyond the command center's cameras, filled with people slowly returning to their homes, their streets, their lives, and she thought about the message they had sent 4 days earlier, when surrender or destruction had seemed like the only two choices available. Let them come, she said quietly. Whoever comes next, whatever they demand, we'll send the same answer we always have. We'll show them exactly who we are, and we'll let them decide if the cost is worth it. Above them, the sky was blue and clear for the first time in 4 days, and across the entire world, humanity looked up, no longer certain they were alone in the universe, but certain, now, of something perhaps even more important. They were certain of themselves.